Policy, Finance, and Elections Committee. And it is good to see all of you. I actually get to see you on the Zoom, so that is very nice, though it's not quite the same as being at a committee table, no doubt about that. I miss that times before we start and so on that we can do that. Nonetheless, during this period of time, this is what we need to use, and so we will use the tools that we have. And so in this case, we are on it. So would like to make a mention of just some comments that I will start out with. First of all, that elections are about the people and it's about the voters. It's really the day that Minnesotans govern. They're the ones on election day that are governing and choosing their representatives. And we serve the people of Minnesota through senators, House, legislature, and the elected officials. And they have a right to ask questions because the people of Minnesota ask us questions. And it is certainly appropriate for us during this time to be able to ask those questions as well. And by the way, without being accused of nefarious motives, just because we're asking a question. Want to treat people who ask questions with respect. They deserve answers, and it's important that they be respected in regards to those answers and also how they ask a question. About 2 weeks ago, I did send a letter to Secretary Simon asking reasonable questions on behalf of the people of Minnesota who've asked questions of us. But they have been met with accusations and disrespect, which is very disappointing. The best way to get Minnesotans to have confidence in the process and outcome is to respect those questions and transparently and without accusations, just simply answer and give us the information that we ask for. Disappointing to see that in the press statement, other things that was not done, and very disappointing. And phrases like no credible reports, no credible evidence, which are very vague and pronounced without substantiating information. So today, our purpose today is to review Secretary Simon's reply and consider other relevant questions, especially where some of the answers were not addressed in the response. Some of the questions in the letter that I had were not addressed in the response. And so I hope that will be the case today so that we can be transparent, open, and respectful. Secretary Simon, I'm glad to have you at our committee today. I understand we have about 30 minutes of your time, so I will not delay any further. And the purpose of our meeting today is not in regards to long statements or other kinds of questions. That's already been done through the letter, which we have read. It's also been done through press releases. So the goal today is to simply deal with the questions and look forward to getting some answers. And so I welcome you to the committee. And Secretary Simon, if you'd like to take a few moments to just identify yourself for the record. And if you have a comment to make briefly, we'd be glad to have that as well.
Madam Chair, your staff had told me I'd be allowed a few minutes to make an opening statement, so I'll take him at his word. May I do that now for a few minutes?
That's what I just said, Secretary Simon. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members. The 2020 election in Minnesota was a great big success on multiple levels. There was no instruction manual. There was no guide. There was no template for running a statewide election during a once-in-a-century pandemic. Thankfully, nonpartisan election officials from every level of government worked extremely hard and worked together really well to provide meaningful access to voters and the highest levels of security, accuracy, and integrity. And the voters of Minnesota this year really leaned in to the challenges. They didn't lean away or turn away. They really leaned in. So let me recount, because the public doesn't have the benefit of this, committee members might, but let me recount for the public, because this is about the voters, what I think, or what I believe from my perspective, are those successes. First, Minnesotans really did adapt well to the uncertainty of the pandemic. In 2018, about 24% of voters voted from home or absentee. This year, that figure was 58%. Put another way, only 42% of voters voted in the traditional way on the given election day in a given precinct. 58% did not. And that tells me, obviously, it was about COVID. It tells me that Minnesotans were really good at adapting and using their own free will to make their own choices and judgments about how best to vote. And I think that was a great success. Second, the polling places were well staffed with election judges. This, Madam Chair and members, was a big blinking red light on our dashboard since the spring. We saw what happened in other states like Wisconsin, Georgia, and others during the presidential primary process, where they were crippled oftentimes in many polling places by the absence of election judges, people who maybe for reasonable reasons didn't want to serve given the undue risk. So we set about in the spring and during the summer and through the fall to work with counties and cities. They're the ones who hire, train, and pay the election judges. The public might not know that. We don't, they do, but we wanted to have their backs. So we set up a series of, I think, 9 statewide meetings where we brainstormed about ways to make sure what happened in those other states wouldn't happen to us. And it worked, in large part due to the great focus and hard work of the folks at the local level. They deserve the credit. They're the ones on the front lines. They're the ones who do the frontline electioneering. And we had, as we always have had, the 30,000 people or roughly that we need on election day to be election judges. So that's number 2. Number 3, polling places were made as safe as possible. Our office coordinated the purchase and distribution to all 3,000 polling places of things like high-grade masks for election judges, disposable masks for voters, hand sanitizers, pumps, sanitation statements, stations, disinfectants. And we worked on some guidelines with the CDC and the Minnesota Department of Health that governed everything from social distancing to the use of pens to the wipe down of the polling surfaces. Fourth, the election was secure. And I know that's been something that you, Madam Chair, have talked about a lot, but it was secure on multiple levels. As of today, and all I can tell you about is what is as of today, there have been no credible or official reports to our office of fraud or voter misconduct. Let me repeat that. There have been no, as in 0, credible reports of any voter misconduct or fraud in this election. And as far as I know, our law enforcement contacts tell us that they haven't received those reports either. So a long record of election integrity continues. And as of today, there is no evidence of any unsuccessful attempt by any unauthorized source to infiltrate our election infrastructure as they tried to do in 2016. This high level of security, I should point out, has been verified just in the past few days by the Department of Homeland Security, by the Attorney General of the United States of America, who has said there is no credible evidence of meaningful widespread fraud, and so far by every single state and federal court in the state of Minnesota. Fifth and finally, Minnesota smashed records for voter turnout. You've heard it before, but it bears repeating. We should all be proud of this. Minnesota, for the 3rd time in a row, was #1 in the country, and this time we broke our own personal best, at least since 1956, just shy of 80%, 79.96% turnout. And all this during a global health crisis. So we have a lot to be proud of. And that last point is particularly important. There are a lot of reasons for our sky-high turnout, but one of them surely is, as you yourself have acknowledged publicly and privately, Madam Chair, one of the reasons for our sky-high turnout is Minnesotans feel in their bones that it's a fair, accurate system with integrity. That's not to say there aren't people on this panel or in the legislature or in the public who very seriously want to see some serious changes. That's of course the case, always. So no system is perfect. But I do think that even those folks know in their hearts, in their guts, that this is a fair, honest system with integrity. Otherwise, they wouldn't bother showing up. Would you? I don't think anyone would. So I'm happy to talk to you today about the election, about how we all achieved this collective success that we did despite huge obstacles, how our system works before, during, and after the election, and how we can improve. But this hearing is not taking place in a vacuum. It is taking place in the middle of a national tidal wave of disinformation, politically inspired lies designed to mislead and manipulate people. So I will not at this hearing amplify or dignify conspiracy theories. We've seen a lot of them this past month in the federal and in the state level. And they're not just wrong, they're dangerous. And they have to stop. And they're dangerous in the short term because I think someone might get killed. I think someone in this country, maybe in this state, is going to get killed. We have amped up people out there who believe wild and unsubstantiated theories about our democracy that risk inspiring violence and even murder. Already in this country, there have been death threats and terroristic activity aimed at election administrators and employees of election equipment vendors. The Secretary of State of Michigan, 2 nights ago, while she was decorating her Christmas tree with her 4-year-old son, faced dozens of armed protesters who showed up to her house shouting obscenities and "Stop the Steal." So while folks in our office haven't received such direct threats, there have been aggressive behaviors. Members of my own family have been the targets of harassment by people who seem truly to actually believe this stuff. They seem truly to believe these corrosive fantasies that are out there being fed to them by people with large megaphones. So the conspiracy theories are dangerous in the longer term because they are causing serious and lasting damage to our country. In a democracy, we always welcome strong differences of opinion, as we do at this committee and in the legislature. But we also need a basic shared reality. And millions of people are being told big lies repeatedly, not just about a particular election contest, but about our entire election system. And those lies are tearing us apart. They're doing the bidding of our foreign adversaries, and they are poisoning our democracy. So I hope that we don't even see today any indirect airing of conspiracy theories here. Any member, regardless of party, or any testifier, regardless of viewpoint, who indulges that kind of recklessness, who tolerates it, who encourages it, or even hints at it, is, I must say, coating themselves in a shame that will never, ever wash off, ever. So I'm here to stop the spread of dangerous disinformation and propaganda, not to encourage it. I'm here to tell the truth about the 2020 election as I know it, which is that by any reasonable measure, it was a huge success. I'm hoping this hearing will give me an opportunity to do that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretary Simon. I think it goes without saying that every single person would abhor any kinds of personal threats to any Secretary of State. And I want to assure you, this is not the first time. As Secretary of State, I had threats as well. It seems to be the nature of the course. Take it in stride. I think this year it is quite a bit more public, and I think more variety of numbers are in there. But certainly, no matter who it happens to, no matter who is, that we all abhor that and find that reprehensible and disavow it and do not support it. However, that should not ever put us in the same thing that when we ask questions about our election system, that somehow that in and of itself is some sort of shameful activity. I will also reject that. And so we're going to go ahead and we're going to deal with information that I believe and that I hope will probably also lay to rest some of those things that just by talking about the turnout and other things, which are excellent, and we all celebrate in that, but there still are some of those questions and sometimes the transparency of not being afraid to face them, to deal with them. And so that's what we're going to do today. Because many times what I think others are saying, well, why don't we just cancel this hearing right now? Because certainly any questions we have might be a problem, but I don't agree with that. I think in a free country, in a free society, we are able to do our business and to be able to ask those questions without being accused of some nefarious kinds of things going on. So with that, I want to just kind of go, because I think it's going to be very important to Minnesotans. I think it'll also be helpful to you, Secretary Simon, as well, to affirm again the process by which equipment is sold in the state of Minnesota, generally purchased by local governments. But again, many people may not be aware of this, that before any election equipment can be used in the state, it must meet the requirements and checks by the federal and state government, right? So the Election Assistance Commission has determined the voting software. They deal with it. They put it through their process through NIST, often National Institute of Standards and Technology. It comes to Minnesota. Your office then has the responsibility to go through that process. And so we actually asked for some of that information, and we are not real sure that we have that whole process laid out for us. So if you would take it from the federal government Election Assistance Commission and just give us kind of a step by step what happens with that election equipment. And by the way, this is true whether it's Dominion, ES&S, this is not specific to any particular kind. Just simply lay out the process for us.
Sure. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. That's a fair question. And I might phone a friend, so to speak. Our elections director, David Maeda, is here, and he really has lived this stuff, both in his prior positions and in this position. But let me just give the overview, Madam Chair. As you rightly point out, it really starts with the Election Assistance Commission, which is a small federal agency that does what it sounds like it does, but principally and primarily one of its big responsibilities is to help with the certification of elections equipment. So what it does is it contracts with a private laboratory, but it itself issues some voluntary voting system guidelines known in the business as VVSG. Madam Chair, I know you were very involved with that as well when you were Secretary of State. The VVSG is simply, best practices or standards. I'm simplifying and generalizing, but that's what it is. So the lab gets its instructions from the EAC and from all the secretaries and other elections administrators around the country that have input into the VVSG. And then with that in mind, they certify or not elections equipment. So any vendor in this country that seeks to market any vending equipment, any elections equipment whatsoever, it can be a tabulator, it can be a central count machine, it can be special equipment for voters with disabilities, they have to go through this process. So assuming just for a minute in this hypothetical that it passes the process and is certified by the EAC, then and only then, at least under Minnesota law, I'm not as familiar with other states' law, but in Minnesota law, we can't even look at a machine. We can't even, it's not even on the menu unless it is first passed muster and passed the vetting process with the EAC. I don't know if other states have that law, but we do. So it's game over if it doesn't make it past the EAC. Then our office, or the Office of Secretary of State, does a separate certification where there are a lot of steps and the public can watch this. It's always open to the public. It has to be noticed publicly. And every time we do certification, our team, and it takes days and weeks sometimes, if a particular vendor wants to certify a piece of equipment, typically it's in the state office building in a committee room or sometimes in the Capitol, whatever space you can get, always noticed and open to the public. Anyone can come in and watch what's being done. And the machine is, this is not a technical term, obviously, put through its paces. And then a report is issued on back and forth, usually some letters or things like that. And I'm fast forwarding here, obviously. And then and only then is it ultimately certified by our office. And so what is certified by our office that already been certified by the federal government, that is what's on the menu for counties and cities to choose. They may only purchase off the menu, and the menu is only a piece of equipment that's been certified by two layers of government, the federal government and the state of Minnesota. So they're free to buy whatever's on the menu, but I will tell you that oftentimes they do their own testing and they put it through the paces themselves. And then there's something before every election, every single election in Minnesota, primary, general, doesn't matter, called the Public Accuracy Test, or PAT. It is what it sounds like, and the first name, the first word is the most important. It is public. It too is noticed. Anyone can waltz right in and watch. Media can show up. Anyone can show up and watch the machines being put through the paces before any election. So every piece of equipment is put through the paces. And when I use that term, I mean they do all sorts of things. They run things called test decks. They try to mess with the machine by doing some hypotheticals.
Secretary Steinman, I'm going to interrupt here a little bit.
Yeah.
If we only have you for 30 minutes, then
Sure.
It takes 20 minutes to go over this. We can have Mr. Maeda do that.
Sure, that's fine. I'm sorry if I went into too much detail. The basic point I'm trying to make is it goes through national, state, and then local testing, and not just testing when it's certified, but testing every time the piece of equipment is used.
Okay. So I wanted to lay that as a foundation to be sure that the general public and everybody has that kind of foundation. But I will tell you, though, that there are still questions and concerns, and especially in my letter that I asked several questions that were in regards to a little bit further the drill down. In other words, we have current state law that has surrounding internet connections in the polling places and cross connections with election equipment. These were questions 3 through 7 that we did not get answered in the letter that you replied to my letter. So it was disappointing, and that's why we need to follow up today, because at the crux of many of these questions are repeatedly the issues of internet connections, electronic connections, all of this. And I'm going to go into also, this is not new. 2016, 2019, even Senator Klobuchar questioned a company's machines and software, considered it a threat to the integrity of our elections, claimed that they are prone to security problems, and specific instances of switching votes in 2018. And then last year was MSNBC also showed how easy it was to hack a system in a video. Now that was later recirculated via Twitter earlier this month, but it originated in last year from MSNBC. So those are the kinds of questions, but they pertain more to the actual polling places. And again, the kinds of emails that those of us have gotten. So the question I have for you, in regards to your office, how can you prove that internet and electronic connection laws surrounding polling place technology, Minnesota Statute 206, was followed by precincts and counties? How do you know that? How do you enforce them? And then the follow-up would be, is there something we could do to maybe, I know we have the PAD, I know we have the post-election reviews, but this is a little bit different. This has to do with election. If you remember, there was a lot of work when we did electronic rosters. A lot of time and attention was spent on that chapter of law in regards to making sure that they were not connected to the internet or connected in such a way that someone could have access. Could you explain how you guarantee the internet electronic systems? How do you enforce that?
Thank you,
Secretary Simon.
And just to correct the record, I think we did answer the question, maybe not the one you wanted to hear. So here's my answer to your question at this hearing. I knew there was one in there. The answer to your question is that the law, as you say, prohibits anyone from using the internet at any time during the election. So the law explicitly allows them to do it before the polls close or after the polls close. But even then, when they do it afterwards, it's just the initial report. It's always an unofficial report, followed by the memory stick and followed by the actual ballots too. So it's just a preliminary call out to save time that some folks do. So as you know, Madam Chair, from personal experience, we don't have guns and badges in our office. There's very little that our office is empowered under law to make the counties do or report to us. But if this committee or if the legislature wanted every jurisdiction to have to report to us or to anyone else, any instance, even for a second, of using an internet connection before, during, or after the polling place, I suppose, just thinking on the fly, that could be something you could do. But I'm persuaded, knowing the 87 county auditors and auditor treasurers, knowing the county elections folks and the city elections folks, the city clerks, I will presume they are acting honorably and they are following the law until there's evidence that they're not.
Thank you, Secretary Simon. And yes, we do in many cases take a look at that, but we also have law enforcement out on our highways. We have plenty of laws about that, and yet we have those who are making sure that these things are enforced, and we'll follow up with maybe thinking about some of those things. You've mentioned some other things as well that we could maybe enhance as far as things being reported to the Secretary of State's office. So that may be one of them as well. But I think the assuming these things is probably not a help. And certainly by my being active on election night and the number of reports that came that there were folks who are trying to get into the county offices in order to supervise, to observe as they are entitled to by law, and were locked out. And those kinds of things don't help when local governments do that. But we will probably follow up this hearing by a little bit more activity. At this time, I'd like to call on Senator Curran, who had expressed interest before in a question, and also we will follow up you with Secretary Simon on those answers to questions 3 through 7 that we didn't seem to find answers to, and we'll follow up with you and see if we can do that more. But with that, I will hand it over to Senator Curran for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary Simon, for being here. So, your opening statement, you highlighted a variety of successes, and Minnesota's always had a great opportunity to celebrate success. But one of your statements is that your goal and job is fair, honest, accurate, transparent elections. For the last 4 years, the legislative agenda for the Secretary of State has been to remove key checks and balances In this particular case, those that weren't done, the vehicle was sought to an external resource was sought to remove witness verification for what we knew was going to be a large mail-in ballot, extension of deadlines beyond November 3rd, just traditional things that we would never do. Our system wasn't broken. Also, you just spoke about compliance with state statute and law. The office continually knowingly supports and supports knowingly that Hennepin County has refused to follow basic state statute in the composition of ballot boards. Now, we had great success. Ramsey County was able to do that. Isn't it your job to remove either real or perceived areas or the public's real or perceived perception that it's fair, honest, open, and transparent? All of those activities would lead to me to believe that would be the exact opposite perception. And we have to do everything we can to maintain that it is fair, honest, and open, and very transparent. So I would like you to at least out of those issues, tell me what actions have been done to make sure that we're going to bring Hennepin County into compliance with the violation, knowingly violating state statutes in the composition of ballot boards. You mentioned a little bit that you have no resources. You have been able to partner with the state's enforcement officer, the Attorney General, on many other activities outside and around elections. Please tell me how you're going to help us resolve that to make sure that everybody in Hennepin County and the state of Minnesota believes that it's fair, open, and honest, and very transparent. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator
Secretary
Coran.
Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Senator Coran, thanks for the question. So the question that you highlighted, at least the most specifically, was the composition of the ballot boards. As you know, that's ongoing litigation right now involving Hennepin County and others. There was an argument about that, oral argument just after the election before the Minnesota Court of Appeals. We're named in that lawsuit, so there's not a lot I can say about that. The judge below disagreed. I mean, just disagreed that that was the case, that Hennepin County had done anything. So there are people appealing that. It's everyone's right to appeal, but so far, the state of the law in Minnesota with the district court ruling is they have not violated the law. The Court of Appeals may reverse that.
Secretary Simon, isn't that correct? If it's a court case, that's your opinion, but we don't know yet, at least from the court.
True. I'm just saying the one opinion that's been written, Madam Chair, I'm sorry, Madam Chair and Senator Coran, the one opinion that we have right now, written opinion, says no, the county did nothing wrong. And it's everyone's right to go to the Court of Appeals or after that to the Supreme Court. But as of now, in the eyes of the law, Hennepin County has done nothing wrong. It's anyone can argue the opposite, and they are arguing that. So.
Well, Secretary Simon, can I ask you then to work with my office then on this kind of an agenda to, first of all, I think the law is quite clear. It says must use election judges. Then it goes to may use other things. Your guide seems to imply that that's a willing choice. They can just do that. It goes to show then, though, I will read or more detail the actual court. Oftentimes they take a little while to come back with more of their reasonings and other things than just their actual one decision or the other. So we'll look forward for more information. But I think it does point out the fact that Ramsey County was able to comply, did it very well with good results. And it just baffles me as to why you would have a county office who could choose, if you're saying what you're saying, Secretary Simon, could choose, and certainly everybody has worked very, very hard to supply those election judges, and they should do that just as a matter even of choice, as Ramsey County did, if nothing else. But we can work on that. We have another question, and I'm going to go to Senator Howe here to ask the next question. And Senator Howe, you can go ahead.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary of State Simon, for being here. I guess the question I have is, and maybe you have not, I mean, you came out and said that you believe that we had a very high level of integrity on this election. My constituents have contacted me numerous times regarding concerns with the integrity of the recent election. And my question to you would you support us in conducting an independent forensic audit of the election so we can put that to rest and actually restore the election, the faith in the election system to my constituents that are questioning this? So we can put, if we got faith that we had a great election, let's do an independent forensic audit of the system and put that to rest for all of us and restore that faith. Could we ask your support in going down that direction so we can put this all to rest?
Secretary Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Howe. Well, that's an intriguing proposal. I assume that you diligently, researched it and understand it. You wouldn't suggest it surely in a public hearing unless you didn't. So could you tell me a little bit more, maybe in some detail, about what you mean? It's hard to answer the question unless I know from you, the originator of the idea, the details about what it is. So I'm sure you've thought about it. So if you might just let us know what
Senator Howe.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair and Secretary of State Simon. We should get those folks to actually look at those SIM cards, look at those machines, make sure that everything was done correctly. There was nothing done underhandedly, and put all that to rest and have those computer experts, independent agency, come in, take a look at those systems and put all that to rest. So all of that innuendo and stuff that's floating out there, we put all that to rest. That's what I'm looking for.
Secretary Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Howe. I'm afraid that doesn't give me enough information to really understand the proposal. I will say that we have really robust and longstanding features before, during, and after the election that I have confidence in and that Minnesotans have confidence in to make sure that we root out any problems and find any wrongdoing where there is any. And there's precious little over the years. The Trump-appointed federal district court judge in Minnesota who looked at the election top to bottom, Judge Brazel, found in her decision that the level of fraud or misconduct in one segment of the electorate since 1979 was, I think, 0.00004%. That's a federal judge appointed by the president. And so I'm satisfied that the systems that we have now work. I'd be interested to know, either now or offline, what's the kind of misconduct that you think is happening or that your constituents think is happening that would merit this kind of thing. So I'd love to address it with you offline. I think so far I have more questions than answers.
But you would.
Senator Howe, let's do that. Let's take this a little bit offline, but if you want to make one final comment, go ahead.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair and Secretary of State Simon. I would just ask for your support on doing a fair, independent audit to put all this stuff to rest, because I don't think any of us have the answers, but I think getting someone else to look at it could do that. And I ask for your support, and I'll get with you offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Howe. And I'd like to bring up the fact that when an election is really close, and granted in those situations, there are questions about that. And we do a recount. And many times when we do the recount, it actually enhances the trust in the system, because we go through a recount of the ballots, look at every single one of them. And the whole purpose of a recount is to affirm. And sometimes when it's really, really close, and there are opportunities to make the switch. But let me bring you up to something else here. And by the way, Secretary Simon, you say there's no guide, but I will say there is a guide. It's called Minnesota state law. And one of the nice things when we do bipartisan work on Minnesota state law, which we were in an excellent place this year, even with the pandemic, we had some really good state election law that would have been very helpful if had it been held to. Because I think the big thing in some of those pandemic situations is having as much certainty as possible. But let me give you just two specific instances. One of them is this year's election in 2020. So we have a candidate who took a look at the tape from the precinct, looked at the results on the Secretary of State website, and they didn't match. Asked the question, they went through a bit of work and find out there was a data entry error. And the results were changed because of that. So she had the tape herself from the precinct. So she knew what the machine printed out from that SIM card. And yet it did not match when it got to the Secretary of State website. And the candidate is the one who asked the questions, not the administrators, not the other folks. The candidate did. And those numbers then changed because of that. And it was said that there was an error, data entry error. Then we have another case, which is from the Pioneer Press. And in this particular situation, it was having to do with the Roseville mayor, actually Dan Rowe, and also Maplewood. And this would have been in 2018. And in this situation, we have a Pioneer Press article And the headline is Computer Glitch Blamed After Early Election Return Showed Wrong Tabulations in Ramsey County Races. And it was interesting because a statement was made by the local county that said there were some changes made to that data, so it flipped the position of a couple of the candidates. We're going to work to make sure that does not happen again. It was very unfortunate, for sure. Then went on to say the software that was used to communicate the vote totals to the state was configured incorrectly. Now, when you have these kinds of press reports, 18 and then now, can you address this situation where results from a precinct are inaccurately entered all the way up to the Secretary of State website? How can that happen? And could you explain a little bit more of what that means?
Sure.
Secretary Simon.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and members. You know, human beings make mistakes, and that happens. It happened when you were Secretary of State several times. That also got press coverage, Madam Chair. So I don't think it's fair to cherry pick a few examples. They are by far the exception, not the rule. I don't want to throw Mr. Triplett under the bus, particularly because he's here and will be a testifier later in this hearing. You can ask him what happened, what mishap happened in Ramsey County. He is a professional. He is one of the real pros in the state of Minnesota. So I would leave that to him. But if one or two human errors are the worst thing you can say about an election in this state or any state, that's a really good election. And again, almost 80%. Those numbers don't lie. People know that.
Secretary Simon,
year after year.
I gave you a couple examples. And these were examples that were caught by candidates, not by the election system. Had they not said something, how many other people might this have happened to? We just don't know about it. And that's why I appreciate, I gave you examples, not to throw anybody under the bus, but if I don't give enough data, then there's vagueness, and I don't believe in doing that. I want it to be that there were tangible situations where this happened, and this makes a difference. But again, it was not caught by the election system. It was caught by the candidates who recognized there was an issue that we were dealing with. So I appreciate the fact that you're right. We are going to celebrate the successes, but we're also doing continuous improvement because we want to be sure we don't gloss over some of these examples, because if you do, then they can become more commonplace because you're ignoring them. Now, certainly that is the case. So I was wondering, one of the specific questions that we have here, would SIM cards be included in the protected data legally required to be retained by the state under 204B.40? It says all election materials. And the reason why I'm mentioning it, because this has come up and it's your opportunity to simply state it right out, it's on the record, and then we're clear. So to that specific thing about the SIM cards and being stored and also being protected while they're stored so they can't be altered. Secretary Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's an interesting legal question. I might defer on that one to B.B. Black, our general counsel, to answer that. She is well-versed and a walking encyclopedia on other laws. So maybe I'll defer to her. And Madam, I just have been texting my 11:30 appointment. They have been very patient, telling them I'm going to be late. So might have to be the ramp here. But I will defer to Ms. Black on that discrete legal.
Okay. Thank you, Secretary Simon. We will certainly get to that and let you go there. One last question, though, I have for you.
Okay.
We asked for information on the Rose v. Simon case and other lawsuits that greatly changed election law in Minnesota and was the subject of a court decision, 8th District Court. Your office has the power to share those documents, yet you're refusing to do so. We would like to work with you on this matter and to be able to see those documents, because it's certainly something that we can. And I want to be sure that when you're invoking attorney-client privilege, you're not required to right now. Is it a choice that you have? And so I would like to ask you again if you would be able to share those documents, or if you'd like to continue this conversation, we'll be glad to talk about it some more.
Yeah, Madam Chair and members, yeah, that is subject, that's an easy one. That's subject to attorney-client privilege. Any documents related to legal strategy or how, what, when, who, and how with litigation, anyone regarding any litigation would answer the question the same way. There's nothing particularly remarkable there. So no, we aren't going to start the precedent, nor did you when you were Secretary, of disclosing to people emails and underlying documents of litigation. It's not done anywhere that I know of in America, in any state, and we're not going to start.
I just want to be clear that it is a choice that you have, though. There's no law that says you cannot. So just to let you know. I appreciate your being here today. Thank you very much. And we'll continue to maybe ask some questions of your staff, and we'll continue to be in touch with you and working to be sure that we continue to have things done as well as we can, and to honestly, openly, and transparently consider those things that are issues and just deal with them. That's how Minnesota people do it. So thank you for your time today, Secretary of
Thank you,
State
Madam.
Simon. I'm glad you could be here.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members, for your time.
Okay, members, I would entertain at this time any other questions, but we could go to Ms. Vivi Black. If you would like to address the question, I believe it had to do with the SIM cards that Secretary Simon deferred to you to be able to maybe address that more thoroughly. Ms. Black.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Bibi Black. I'm General Counsel for the Office of the Secretary of State. With respect to those cards, the cards are, as I understand it, generally reused by the counties and local municipalities in future elections. They are retained during the contest period, but the real source documents in any contest are in fact, and or recount, are in fact the ballots, and the ballots are the focus of the retention under 204B.40. The cards are not cheap, and I would suggest that if you wanted to mandate that the cards should be retained for the 22 months required under federal law in 204B.40, you might consider the impact of that on local municipalities and counties. As I say, they are to retain those until the contest period is over, but it's really the ballots, and the ballots are retained.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. We will follow up with other questions, but let me ask you this. So until the contest period, what is the date of the contest period for this year? What would be the end of that? What would be that date?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. The contest period has now expired, except for the 3 races in the other body, which had recounts. And the contest period then will expire 7 days. The contest period generally for a general election is 7 days after the canvassing board has declared the result. If there is a recount, then it's 7 days after the recount has been certified. So it's there certainly is opportunity under Chapter 209 to serve and file the contest within that 7 days. It's a shorter period for primaries and special elections. It's only 5 days for the primary, and then I think it's 2 days for the special election. But it's all after the results have been certified. And I might add that while a candidate has to request a recount, any person can contest an election in Minnesota. And currently we have that situation where we have both candidates and non-candidates who have filed contests before the deadline, and those are going through the courts right now.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that information. I think this one might be either you or Mr. Maeda. Let's see. Okay, there you are, Mr. Maeda. When you do Zoom and you have a person's face up there, if depending upon who's speaking, it'll move. So sorry, Mr. Maeda, I had to go find you there. So one of the questions I have right now is, what are the qualifications for a non-Uocava voter to be sent an electronic ballot through the Americans with Disabilities Act? Not quite sure which one of you. Mr. Maeda, would you like to start the response to that?
Sure, Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is David Maeda. I'm the Director of Elections for the Secretary of State's Office. So this year we received quite a number of requests from members of the disability community to be able to receive an electronic ballot similar to the UOCAVA system we have in place. We worked with the Attorney General's office, who the ADA requires a reasonable accommodation, and we thought if this ended up in court, we would lose that. And Ms. Black can elaborate on that process a little more. But so voters with disabilities that requested an electronic ballot, we worked with a vendor, actually the last vendor's product that we certified, Democracy Live, in being able to provide an electronic ballot for voters that requested that. And I do not know the numbers that did that. I haven't had a chance to follow up with the counties. I know we did get a few once the system went live that first day and people found out about it, but I don't have the final numbers.
So Mr. Maeda, did that take some software programming to do for that particular piece of it? Mr. Maeda?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, basically, again, it was a piece of equipment we certified, which is an assistive voting device from a company called Democracy Live. It's called an Omni ballot. And so if you go to the polling place in some of our precincts, they had this new device, which basically allows an optical scan ballot to be marked via touchscreen. The assistive voting for those with disabilities that required an accessible ballot, it used the same software that you would see on the Democracy Live product and in the polling place, but it required the voter to print out the ballot on paper, mail that into their county, who would then have to duplicate it, have their ballot board duplicated onto an official ballot, and then that would be read. So, I mean, the software itself is similar to what's used in the polling place, but it requires that extra step because obviously a voter at home can't print out an official ballot on ballot stock.
I think, Mr. Maeda, we're going to have to delve into that a little bit more as well. Because in regards to Minnesota current election law, it appears as again that there is the Attorney General and the Secretary of State office, and I can appreciate that, but I think I have more questions, but I'm going to defer for that right now because with this information, I think I have some other questions which I will go into further at a different time. One of the things that I do want to also clarify, there were a handful of counties that restricted those wanting to watch the ballots being counted in person, as they have the right under Minnesota election law, from doing so on election night. I received several calls in regards to this. There was one situation that I know of where the sheriff was called. And so we asked for information that indicated what the Secretary of State office put out as far as guidance or information or so on to the counties to either that night or prior to that night in making sure that the right of the people, that they are able to come in. And again, when you shut people out from doing that, and that becomes an issue, that fuels questions and concerns. If people are able to exercise their right, be able to observe, that is very helpful. So this was very disturbing to people on a very major election year. So again, there were a few of these counties, but can you tell us what the Secretary of State office gave in guidance or direction in regards to this issue, either before the election or on election night? Mr. Maeda.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, the guidance we gave harkened back to 2008 when we had a very close U.S. Senate race, and we had people showing up at government buildings requesting to be a ballot guard. And there's a very specific process and statute on allowing ballot guards into buildings. And so we basically sent out guidance related to ballot guards, which wasn't getting to the issue I think that you addressed on people showing up wanting to watch absentees being counted at government centers. I mean, they're two different things, but that was the actual guidance that we sent out that night.
So, Mr. Maeda, do you think maybe some of these counties got confused and just because somebody wanted to observe, they maybe leapt to the conclusion that these were, quote, and by the way, I have never heard of the phrase ballot guard. I've not heard about it in an email and a question. This is totally new. So could you please explain what you mean by a ballot guard or where the source of that is? Because I've never heard that phrase. Mr. Maeda.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, again, back in 2008, when we knew that the U.S. Senate race was going to be incredibly close, we had people showing up at the government buildings saying they wanted to be a ballot guard. And what that basically meant, and I was in the city of Minnetonka at the time when we actually had someone show up at City Hall wanting to be a ballot guard. They wanted to be allowed to watch the ballots being brought into the building and then secured within the building. And then they wanted to be able to stay in the building, watching the room that the ballots were in, to make sure that only authorized people that had a business reason to go into that secure area actually did so. And that's what a ballot guard is. And that's actually defined in statute. I think it's defined in statute.
Well, that's very interesting that it's, I think sometimes what I find is people who do not work in the election system a great deal use phrases or words that come from a variety of sources. What they generally mean is they want to observe. And the best reading, I believe, from county election officials should say, do you mean you want to observe? And I think actually, Mr. Maeda, a lot of, when people are shut out from being able to observe something that is very personal to them, very important to them, that can fuel some of those kinds of questions. And we are much better served by making that possible and doing so. And so I think we might have a little work to make sure that people's rights are not rejected just because they didn't use the phrase that would have gotten them maybe a little bit further. Thank you very much, Mr. Maeda. We do have some testifiers at this time. So members, I would like to go ahead and bring the testifiers in at this time. So with that, I'm going to have Ms. Kim Crockett be able to give some testimony for a few moments. So Ms. Crockett, you can go ahead. And again, as we explained ahead of time, there's only a few moments, so I look forward to hearing from you.
Yes, and I'm trying to figure out how to get on the video screen so that you can see. Oh, I know what I've done. I've blocked
on the bar on the bottom. If you move your cursor, it'll usually show up.
I think.
Okay.
How's that?
Very good.
Good morning.
All right. Welcome to the committee, Ms. Crockett. Please go ahead and remember just a few minutes for today.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. I prepared something so that I can be quick and then answer any questions you may have. Minnesota Statute 203B.121 was passed following the 2008 recount that you were just discussing. And among other reforms, required governing bodies to establish a ballot board to accept and reject absentee ballots, and that the election judges, and I'm quoting, performing the duties of the ballot boards must be of different major political parties. So just as voters expect when they walk into a precinct to vote in person, that they'll be hopefully met with people from both the Republican and Democrat parties, perhaps others. The legislature, following that very messy, contentious 2008 recount, decided that it would be a common sense requirement so that when voters are choosing to vote by absentee ballot, those ballots are accepted and rejected by, examined, processed by a ballot board that meets party balance requirements. Now, to the best of my knowledge, the Secretary of State's office has never enforced this law. In fact, the Secretary of State's guide gives election officials at the local and county level the option of simply ignoring that law and hiring temporary employees rather than citizen election judges from the major parties. Testimony on October 8th before this committee from Hennepin and Ramsey County provided a stark contrast in the approaches to this ballot board law. The Hennepin official acknowledged the law but noted that she had been given permission by the secretary to ignore it and that it was hard to meet the requirements of the law. The official from Ramsey County, however, testified that he was able to meet those requirements. And I believe Mr. Triplett is here today without great difficulty. He had to get creative, but he was committed to doing it. Even for the very long voting season, 46 days plus 7 that are now for the 2020 and during the pandemic. In 2020, I am only aware of 2 counties that met the law. That would be Ramsey County and Olmsted. They both established ballot boards and staffed them with citizen election judges, meeting the party balance rule. Given that there were 1.9 million absentee ballots cast out of 3.3 million, as the secretary said, 58% of voters or votes counted. The enforcement of this very common sense statute is even more important. And that concludes my testimony, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Crockett. Members, are there any questions of Ms. Crockett?
I do have a couple suggestions that I forgot to make. Given that there's no apparent history or interest on the part of the Secretary of State's office to enforce this election integrity law, perhaps this committee could draft language that clarifies the Secretary of State's duty to do so, to enforce the law, and make the procedure for governing bodies crystal clear.
Thank you, Ms. Crockett.
You're welcome.
With that, we'll proceed to the next testifier. We have Ms. Susan Smith. You are muted. You just need to run the cursor over the bottom of the screen and
how's that?
Yes, that works just fine. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I will limit my comments to the post-election review process, as was asked, and I did submit the testimony in writing so that if I, skim over something, you have it if you want to share it. I also want to comment, I'm a little concerned that the Secretary of State kind of disparaged people who want to question this process. I think it's highly inappropriate and intimidating. And we cannot get through this process and build the unity that we're supposed to be seeking when we begin the process by suggesting that anyone who questions what happened on election night is somehow possibly a liar or trying to invoke harm on the other party. It's not the case. It's in fact the opposite. I think we have to really look at what happened in this election, and we need to get to the bottom of it, because when nearly half the state definitely feels like there are problems, we need to figure out why that is. In the
Madam Chair, this is Senator Lane.
Okay, yes, Senator Lane, you've interrupted the testifier.
I would just ask if she would introduce herself as to where she was an election judge, give us a little background. Thank you.
All right, Senator Lane. Ms. Smith?
So I'm Susan Smith, and I was not an election judge. I am an attorney, and so I work sometimes not for the Republican Party, but I am a Republican, and I did file a petition with the Supreme Court regarding the PER process and the failures that were found at it, and asking for it to be redone under the, following the guidelines and the rules and the laws that are appropriate to that process.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. You can go ahead with your testimony.
Okay. So we do have very clear rules for these PERs to be done. The PERs were performed between November 13th and the 20th of November. We had many volunteers that went out to these PERs all over the state of Minnesota. And we received reports from across the state of Minnesota that there were problems at the PERs. So I'll just quickly go through and say that just some examples. Hennepin County was perhaps the most
You're breaking up, Ms. Smith.
example of denial of access. Hopefully my internet connection will be fine. They had a room that they put one camera in the room. They would not let anybody in the room. There was no sound to the room, and people could basically see nothing that was happening in the PER. It was too far away, and it was not a clear feed. There were many counties that kept people 20 feet away, some 30 feet away. Many of the counties had people only able to be behind the officials, so they literally could not see the ballots at all. Or ballots brought in sometimes in boxes, like just cardboard boxes. They weren't sealed, so there was no way to confirm any sort of chain of custody of the ballots, and that is critical. That there be chain of, there should be signatures on the ballots, on the envelopes that they are in, etc. There was one example that there were ballots brought in a purse. There were just random bins, and there were reports of missing ballots. There were reports that they had commingled ballots with precincts. There were, in some counties where people could get a better look, there were absentee ballots that supposedly had been mailed in, absentee ballots that didn't appear to be folded. There were reports where the count totals didn't match. There were reports that there wasn't the party balance that was required. The observers should be able to get the names and titles of people who are working at the PERs. They were denied that information. There were supposed to be teams of election judges at each table, and those judges needed to sign the sheets. That did not happen. I know for sure in one instance of the information from the review, and that they were told to follow up in an email. They followed up with an email to get it, and then they were told that the worksheets were thrown away. The worksheets are election materials and have to be retained for 22 months. There were many people who asked to see the outer envelopes to confirm that they had them. And they were not shown to the observers in almost every instance. And there were at least some instances where it was indicated that they didn't know if they had the outer envelopes anymore. People asked to see the tapes of the totals, and they weren't allowed to see the tapes. And then finally, I think one point that kind of sums it up, one of the election officials said observers. And so I think it's important to note that ultimately the responsibility for the PER process and the canvass, it does actually rest with the Secretary of State and the judges that he calls to help him. And this is actually a constitutional requirement, and that is who's responsible for this ultimately. We have chosen to allow there to be these county boards to help that canvassing board. But in the end, it is the Secretary of State who has a constitutional duty to do this. It is not a constitutional duty the counties do it. It is the job of the Secretary of State, and he has failed to do his job, whether it's training or whether it's by choice. I don't know. We need to get to the bottom of it, but this has been a failure. The fact that so many people are concerned is something that we all need to wonder, why is that? And the narrative that he's going to keep spinning, that it's all wonderful, I understand he's going to keep saying that, but there's a very large group of Minnesotans that do not agree with him. And is to actually count not just the ballots, but to audit the system. And if it's all as wonderful as he would like us to believe, there's nothing to fear. And those SIM cards, by the way, they are election materials. They do matter because there's data on them. So everything related to the election should be saved, all of it. And we have to have transparency so that this doesn't ever happen again. So with that, I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. And my understanding, you've also have written testimony, but you're going to give to the committee.
Yes,
Thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Smith.
Thank you.
All right, then we're going to proceed to Mr. Weibel. I hope I pronounced it. It could be Weibel or Weibel. I'm not quite sure. Mr. Weibel, you have a few moments also to testify, and then members were also asking, Mr. Triplett has requested to testify. So, Mr. Weibel, go ahead.
Is it possible to ask one question of the last testifier?
Sure. Senator Lane.
Yes, I would just like to ask.
Smith.
I would like to ask her if these were some of the items that she brought into her court case that she brought to the Supreme Court, which was dismissed.
Ms. Smith?
Yes, it is. And the court did dismiss it. And unfortunately, they didn't address the real issue. Their decision was that
Ms. Smith, if you could turn off your video so maybe your audio will work better.
We needed to serve
Ms. Smith?
county.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Try it again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead. That's better.
All right. So, yes, some of those materials were there. Obviously, are more. We didn't include every affidavit of every voter across the state who submitted concerns. But I think, unfortunately, the Supreme Court, failed. I think they failed the state in their decision, and I'm unsure why they did not hold the canvassing board accountable, because our Constitution requires the canvassing board, the state canvassing board, to do their job, not the counties. The counties work at the direction of the canvassing board, and we sought to have the canvassing board be held accountable. So I think it was a mistake of the Supreme Court, and I think that is tragic.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Thank you, Senator Lane. Mr. Weibel, you can go ahead and testify.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my last name is Weibel, but don't worry about the pronunciation.
Of course.
Completely understandable.
I'm so sorry.
It works great for spammers and spam callers. So, but overall, I think what we need to really focus on, and I absolutely agree with Secretary Simon that transparency is absolutely essential. The published data that he is responsible for on the Secretary of State's website is the gateway to the first of ballots for November 3rd. I could keep going on, but this is his data. This is what I'm seeing. So when I see stuff like this, I worry. And so I'll give you a specific. Voter ID 1727522 was born in 1850. The oldest person on the planet right now alive is 113 years old. And there's more stuff like that we're seeing. And so this kind of stuff makes me really uneasy when I see stuff from the data. And there was earlier data that I looked at back in February of 2020, and I started looking at the 2019 election. And there were similar types of data points like this that were inexplicable. And even on the Secretary of State's existing website right now, when you look at the 2019 elections, you will actually see that the county numbers, some of them are 0. And so they're not rolling up the data. And when you drill down on some of those counties, the cities will be at 0, but then you drill into the cities and all of a sudden you see a school board election, a municipal election. But the totals aren't working. So this is where, yes, there are viable audits that do need to be done. So when we look at an independent audit, number one, we should review the log files of all systems to see when and why our equipment connecting to the internet. That should be available. That should be part of the public record. We should review all persons right now that have no birth dates. We should review all people who have birth dates above 100. I can start there. So I think we should be talking about some guidelines in the future in subsequent meetings where we talk about these are the things that are going to be required.
Thank you, Mr. Weibel. I think those are some good suggestions, and without question, some of that data, other people should take a look at that as well, because those things should add up. Just to mention to you members, that the counties do have time to do entry of voter registrations that come after 3 weeks before Election Day, on Election Day, or in this case, maybe even after. So they do have that time, and they have had that kind of time, though I would say that we should take a look at that because things have changed. And with the electronic rosters and other things that have been accomplished, I don't know that that standard, which was established back, I believe, somewhere around 2004, needs to be updated and changed so that we don't have that delay and thereby many of these kinds of questions and cleaning up the data such as outliers, which means somebody is older than the oldest person on earth and is voting. We just need to take care of those outliers. And we have a system right now through the Secretary of State office to get those reports to the counties and ask them to make that accurate. There may be a very reasonable situation there, but until it's looked at, we don't know whether it is or isn't, but it's fair for Mr. Weibel to ask that those things be checked into. So I know Mr. Maeda is online today, and maybe Mr. Maeda, you could send an email to this committee or to my office, and some of those things that Mr. Weibel has pointed out, that maybe you could address some of those issues and how the Secretary of State office might clear them up. And maybe we have an earlier date for all that entry, considering the high use of electronic rosters and other methodologies right now, that we don't need to have this extremely long time to get the data entered. Would that be okay, Mr. Maeda?
Madam Chair, yes. I'll just add, no, I mean, one of the issues about changing based on electronic poll book use, at this point, only half of our state are using them. So for many counties, particularly in greater Minnesota, they still are doing the hand entry, but we can talk about this in the future.
Yes, Mr. Maeda, but in those cases, there are usually townships that have very small numbers. Most of the larger ones, which are usually the result of delayed data entry, are using the electronic rosters for the obvious reason that it makes that much easier. I do have Senator Lane, and I believe, let me see here, Senator Lane and Senator Carlson. Senator Carlson, you haven't asked a question yet, so would you go ahead, Senator Carlson, ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make sure that we understood that the birth date issue has been covered many times before, and that there was a period when you did not have to provide either a birth date or an accurate birth date in your registration. So to look at the age of people is a little misleading. And also there was a time when the default birth date was put into the system, and that was in the default birth date was 1900. And I think if we have people that we actually think are well over 100 years old, we should identify those people. And I think that the county or any election administrator can go right to that door and find out if that person really is 123 years old or anything like that. And let's just get it cleared up. And it would be important also to look at the date of original registration too. I've looked into some of these things, and it was several years ago that I did, and it was because of similar complaints of people not existing, of addresses not existing, and people with wrong names. And when I found out who these people really were, there was let's say, a human error description for the explanation. There was a transposition of an address where it was 1632 versus 1623, where there was someone who wrote their address with a 7, and the person evidently had a European background and crossed their 7 like a lot of Europeans do, and it became a 4. And they voted for 20 years with that incorrect address. And so, you can go back and look at those things. And actually, I won't go into the detail of my response to that constituent, but there were errors that could be explained, and those errors were entered into the system in the time when, I'm sorry, Madam Secretary, it was when you were the Secretary of State. So that they happen, and they happen all the time, and they will continue to happen. And so will human errors. And we need to make sure that we figure out what happened and get them corrected. And nobody wants to look at a voting record that a 123-year-old died. But I do know that I'm of the age where a lot of my family members are dying, my dad, my sisters-in-law, and I have checked the registration of those people right after they died. And in fact, before we got the death certificate, they were already listed as deceased on the voter rolls. So there is, and this is something that secretaries of states have done. And sometimes they die out of state. Sometimes they die in a place where where their death certificate does not go through the county of residence. So they get deleted. But I think we need to make sure that we're looking at these things with a level head, and that we correct them when we see them, we complain about them if they're wrong, and we investigate them if that complaint is valid. So, and I just want to thank the responders here to make sure that they're looking at things with that kind of a fair and level-headed attitude.
Thank you, Senator Carlson. I couldn't agree more. Straightforward, take a look at it. Mr. Maeda is here today. We really appreciate that. Mr. Weibel, a private citizen doing some math, like we have folks out there who do this. And if every single year, every single election, we address those things, hopefully it's going to get smaller and smaller as the laws of collecting data get to be a little bit more accurate. So I agree with you, Senator Carlson. Look forward to that. Okay, Senator Lane, you have a question?
Mute. Yes, thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. I just was, with respect, wondering why one of the few testifiers was a person who actually had so little knowledge. In other words, he should be asking the questions, I would think, as to how does this work where somebody is registered at 120 years old, and how can this happen, rather than just pointing them out as errors. What I should think that he would have contacted you about possible errors, and you could have corrected him. Because, for instance, we have many times explained this birth date thing. I think it was 1987 or something, where before that, people didn't list your birth dates. So when I, 4 years ago, went into the system to try to find out, just to check my registration, as people were told to do, check your registration, and I couldn't find myself. So I had to ask somebody, why can't I find myself? I've been voting every year, every election. And they said, when did you first vote before approximately 87? Yes, well, then you don't have a birth date listed. And to find your registration, you had to put down your birth date. So in order to find your registration, you have to put in 1900, because that's what your birth date is in the system. And so I did that, and I redid my registration online to actually go through that process of how does it work online, to clarify simply my birth date and get online. But if a person was, if it goes back to 1900, then in 2020, a person could be who has voted since before 1987, they'd all be 120 years old. So that's just a fact of the system for those who haven't corrected their own or been corrected. And this is just one example of how this testifier could have asked the questions instead of just claimed they were fraud in some way. And we're actually a part of ERIC, which is a nationwide program that actually goes through our list and lists in various states and compares them and checks and makes sure that there's not a person being registered in more than one state, et cetera. And we do the Social Security death records so that we clear the records of the deaths. We do all these things, and the question might be, how do we do them? What do we do? And why are these situations appearing this way, rather than just, oh my God, fraud. It's not. It's actually facts and reasons behind each of these things.
Senator Lane, you used the word fraud. I want to remind you that our testifier, Mr. Weibel, did not. He gave data, he gave information, and through that was also giving the information to the question. And Senator Carlson picked up on that very correctly. And I talked with Mr. Maeda, but I think to criticize the testifier for doing some very important work, as you did on your own record, and he did as well. We want to value and appreciate that. So thank you, Mr. Weibel, and I will take those things that you have brought up as a question to be addressed, just like Senator Carlson brought up, and I will work with Mr. Maeda to take that forward. So with that, we will now go to Mr. Triplett. You waited a while, Mr. Triplett. Thank you very much for being with us today. So why don't you go ahead and make your comments, Mr. Triplett. You're muted. It was a great conversation starter though, Mr. Triplett.
Can you hear me now?
Can you lean into your microphone? You're very soft.
I believe I have unmuted.
Yeah, you are muted. I can hear you, but make your volume. You're very, very soft. I can hardly hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's much better.
Great, thank you. Sorry for that that confusion, Madam Chair. That seems to be a commonality with me, so I will look into fixing that.
As you lean forward, it was actually a little bit better than when you lean back. Thank you.
Is this better?
Yes.
Great, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Sorry for that disruption. Okay. I was asked to be here at the request of the Secretary of State's office, so I have not prepared any comments or testimony, as they solely asked me to be here for any clarifying questions. So as a public official, especially a public official who conducts elections, I have no problem standing for any questions the members may have, but I do not have any prepared remarks, as I was asked to be here at the request of the Secretary's office.
Thank you very much, Mr. Triplett. I really appreciate that due diligence that you have. You know, Mr. Triplett, one thing I think of is that Mr. Weibel brought up some things, and he's just talking about them in a statewide basis, but there could possibly be some in Ramsey County. Maybe you and Mr. Weibel might be able to put your heads together and to take a look at this, and especially in those portions that might happen to be within Ramsey County as a highly populated county. And it might be a great exercise in digging into them. And by the way, folks, I want to tell you, when private citizens put hours of their own time and resources into doing this work, it is valuable. I just always think it amazing. All the election judges who volunteer, county administrators, all due respect to you, Mr. Triplett, but we get paid to do this. Mm-hmm. And so this is our job. But these private citizens that step up and do this work of their own accord because they care about the election system, they're particularly interested. And by the way, my greatest thing was being an election judge for 11 years. And it is still my very favorite position to have ever held, was to be in the polling place on election, upholding Minnesota election on, not as I wished it to be, not as I thought it could be, but as it was currently written on behalf of Minnesotans. It's a great privilege to do that. But those 30,000 people that we depend upon to step up and to take those positions, a great deal of respect for them, and especially in times like this. And I want to thank you, Mr. Triplett, for being here today, and especially for recognizing their value and including them and making them part of it as 206 requires. And also that passion and that concern is not to be taken lightly. So thank you for being here today. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So with that, members, is there anything else, any other senators who would like to bring up any issue or have a question? This certainly won't be your last opportunity, by the way. We do realize that there are some questions that have been brought up today, other pieces of information. We want to be sure and follow it up in a timely fashion. I think that holding hearings is the best way for Minnesotans, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, or independents, their best way to get information. And many of the questions brought here today are their questions, and that we are able in a transparent way be able to make this available, the answers available, and follow through with it. And you as senators being here today honor those people by your attention and by your being available and being here today. And thank you to our able staff as well who have been able to be here. Any folks who have given testimony today, if you wish to submit anything in writing, you are welcome to do so and submit it to Paul Carlson, our committee administrator. and he will distribute it to the rest of the committee so that you also can take every opportunity you have to take a look at it, ask more questions, and see what might be there. That's part of the give and take of what we do in a committee hearing that I consider of great value. So I'm just going to give one last check before I adjourn if there's any details. Senator Carlson, I see a chat message here. You want to make a closing comment. And also, members, there is some data from Mr. Weibel in regards to information on individual CDs. Just to mention, Mr. Weibel, once the Zoom meeting is ended, I'm not confident that all that data is retained in the chat box. So we'll look forward to receiving that information from you. Senator Carlson, would you like to make a comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I want to really thank everybody for taking part of this. Whether we all agree with each other or not, there's something to be learned by every comment that's made. And I also want to make sure that we give, like you mentioned, the people who are volunteers, and that includes the voters, they volunteer to come in and do their voting. And make sure that they are appreciated. The county people are appreciated, the city people, all of these people that are trying their best to make things work as we hope and wish and expect them to work. And when we talk about people like the Secretary of State making a failure, I'm hoping that the people that have provided the information, and that goes right on down to the individual voters, that they are not dissuaded from staying a part of this whole system, because there's always human error. There's always some things we need to do better. And I think you agree, Madam Chair, that there probably should be some things that we do need to freshen up in our voting system. And there's a lot of things that I have thought about. But one thing that we want to make sure is that if we do apply a criticism of any part of this, it's a criticism of the entire system. So it's a criticism of the voters. It's a criticism of the election judges, of the people that come to the precincts and attempt to oversee what is being done there and make sure that it is done according to law and according to expectations. And if we do see something that doesn't seem right, it is our responsibility to fill out a complaint, or to make the complaint, or even to the point of filing some kind of suit and having it evaluated by the highest level of people that can evaluate it. And we do know that some of these complaints have been dismissed, and they have been dismissed by the Supreme Court in Minnesota, and the opinions are written by the Chief Justice, who is generally considered fairly Republican because she was appointed by Republicans, and she is, tends to lean that way. So when we make a criticism of the entire system, she has the last word. And I trust her, and I think that her opinions really make a difference in how we need to approach this. But I am willing to look into any of the complaints that we have and any of the details, because unless we listen to all of these, we won't get better. And I want to see us get better. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Carlson. And I look forward to working with you and to considering some of those things. Just to mention, though, the voters have a specific responsibility in regards to coming to vote and complying with Minnesota law and giving their accurate information, so on and so forth. That is specific. But as to running the equipment, that is not a voter's responsibility. That is the chief election official, the counties, cities, and townships working together. They have that specific responsibility. Don't call it, it's just a duty and a responsibility. And in our form of republic government, because we have a constitution, so we are a republic, there is a separation of duties, separation of powers. And so we recognize that. One of the concerns that I would say, Senator Carlson, is some of my concerns are that we are having the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, and the courts involved in changing election law during the process of actually conducting the election. And so I look forward. I think that has opened up some doors that I think are concerned. But I'm sure you have a list. I have a list. We'll get together, share a list. Thank you very much, Senator Carlson. With that, members, I appreciate your being available today for this very important responsibility of this committee hearing. And thank you. And please stay tuned. We may have another one even yet before the holidays to follow up while things are fresh in our mind. With that, thank you very much. And we are adjourned.
Thank you.